There's something many people don't realize about the cost of constantly being nice. We're told from a very young age to be polite, to be agreeable, to smile, and to avoid conflict at all costs. But there's a critical distinction that needs to be made between being kind and being agreeable. One reflects strength, the other often stems from fear. And the more we confuse the two, the more we compromise who we are. In neuroscience, we study how behavior is shaped by both biology and environment. And being overly nice, what you might call chronic niceness, isn't just a personality quirk. It's a behavioral pattern that often arises from deeply ingrained survival mechanisms. People-pleasing behavior can originate in early life, usually as a strategy to secure attachment, approval, and a sense of safety in a world that might have seemed unpredictable or even unsafe. That instinct to keep everyone happy, to avoid disagreement, to be pleasant even when it goes against our own boundaries, it can hardwire itself into the brain. But here's the thing, just because something is wired into your brain doesn't mean it's serving your life. In fact, many of our default behaviors, when left unchecked, can quietly erode our well-being, our goals, and even our sense of identity. Always being nice is one of those behaviors. The prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for planning, decision, making, and social behavior, works alongside the limbic system to process emotional input. When we anticipate a social interaction, our brain evaluates it for potential threats. If we've been conditioned to associate disapproval or disagreement with danger, our nervous system responds accordingly. The sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, the same system responsible for the fight or flight response, activates not just when we're in physical danger, but also when we fear emotional rejection. That's why being assertive or saying no can feel so physically uncomfortable. Your biology is working overtime to avoid what it perceives as risk, but biology isn't destiny. Your nervous system isn't a dictator, it's a messenger. And sometimes we need to override that message with conscious, strategic action. Being nice to everyone often masquerades as virtue, but at its core, it's usually about emotional self-preservation. And the problem with that is, when you make keeping the peace your primary mode of operation, you sacrifice your authenticity. You begin to suppress your opinions, your emotions, and even your goals just to maintain harmony. And that suppression has consequences. Long-term suppression of your true feelings, especially in social contexts, increases stress hormones like cortisol. Elevated cortisol levels over time impair immune function, disrupt sleep, increase abdominal fat storage, and reduce cognitive flexibility. You become more anxious, less focused, and more emotionally volatile. Ironically, trying to keep everyone else comfortable often makes you internally unstable. That is not a sustainable path. Now, this doesn't mean we should swing to the other extreme, becoming cold, hostile, or dismissive. The goal isn't to abandon kindness, it's to stop weaponizing it against yourself. There is a difference between being kind and being a doormat. There is a difference between being compassionate and being self-erasing. People often ask how they can stop being so nice all the time, and the answer is, you don't have to become rude or aggressive. You just need to begin the process of building boundaries. Boundaries are the psychological equivalent of a strong immune system. They protect your internal state from external intrusion, and like immunity, they must be learned, strengthened, and sometimes rebuilt. Boundary setting is a skill, and like all skills, it improves with repetition and reward. Every time you say no to something that doesn't serve you, you teach your brain that discomfort is not danger. You build resilience in the nervous system. You begin to rewire the circuitry that says, if I don't please everyone, I'm at risk. That's how neuroplasticity works. Behavior changes the brain. If you've lived your life prioritizing others at the expense of yourself, you may have to relearn how to make choices based on your values rather than your fears. This process involves confronting discomfort. Saying no when you're used to saying yes will activate anxiety, but anxiety is not the enemy. It's the signal that you're moving in a new direction, and most importantly, anxiety is temporary. The benefits of self-alignment far outweigh the short-term emotional cost of standing your ground. Let's talk about the biological feedback loop that governs this process. When you make a decision that aligns with your true desires or values, even a small one, you activate the dopaminergic reward system in the brain. Dopamine is not about pleasure, it's about motivation, about reinforcing behavior that the brain interprets as beneficial. So when you hold a boundary, even if it feels awkward or unfamiliar, your brain gets a hit of reinforcement if you recognize it consciously. Over time, this reinforces the identity of someone who values themselves, someone who isn't afraid of displeasing others in order to stay true to themselves. This process is incremental. No one flips a switch and stops being nice overnight. But you can begin by identifying the moments where you suppress your truth to avoid friction. And you can begin experimenting with low-stakes resistance, expressing a different opinion, declining an unnecessary favor, or asking for space when needed. These are the reps in the gym of personal integrity. Let me emphasize something here. Not everyone deserves your energy. The belief that you must be available, agreeable, and emotionally accommodating to everyone is a belief that sets you up for burnout. There is solid evidence from studies on emotional labor that consistently managing or faking emotions for the sake of others leads to exhaustion, emotional disconnection, and even depression. When you spend your energy catering to others at the expense of yourself, you deplete the very resources you need to show up in a meaningful way for yourself and for those who actually matter. It's also worth noting that being overly nice can attract manipulative or narcissistic personalities. These individuals thrive in environments where boundaries are absent. They test how much they can take, how much you'll tolerate, how far they can go before you push back. If you never push back, you become an ideal target, not because you're weak, but because you've been conditioned to associate confrontation with danger. And until that pattern is interrupted, you will remain vulnerable. When we study the nervous system, we understand that self-regulation is key. The ability to stay grounded in high-stress situations, to remain clear, headed when there's pressure to conform or comply, is one of the most powerful indicators of resilience. And it is developed, not inherited. Every time you choose alignment over appeasement, you strengthen that capacity. Let's be honest, being nice can be an addiction. It gives you the illusion of control. It temporarily eases anxiety. It may even give you a dopamine hit when someone praises you or shows gratitude. But like all addictions, the long-term cost is steep. You begin to lose touch with what you want, what you need, and who you are. And if you lose that connection long enough, you'll find yourself living a life built on other people's preferences, not your own vision. So how do you recalibrate? You start by pausing, before agreeing to something, before smiling through discomfort, before offering help out of reflex. Pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this because it aligns with who I am, or because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't? That moment of pause is critical. It gives your prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, time to override the reactive circuitry of the limbic brain. That's where power begins. You must also begin to tolerate being misunderstood. This is perhaps the hardest part. If you've built your identity around being liked or needed, being misunderstood will feel threatening. But growth requires that you release the need for universal approval. Not everyone will like the real you, but the people who matter, the ones who value you for your truth, not your utility. They can only find you when you stop hiding behind niceness. The irony is that when you stop trying to please everyone, the relationships you do form become more authentic. They're based on real connection, not performance. They have depth, not just politeness. And in those relationships, your nervous system can finally relax, because it's not spending energy managing impressions, it's not scanning for rejection, it's not performing, it's just being. Understand this, your brain has one primary directive: to keep you alive. But you are not here to simply survive. You're here to grow, to build, to express, to challenge, and to contribute in a meaningful way. That doesn't happen when your primary mode of engagement is self-suppression in the name of being liked. There is nothing noble about abandoning yourself for others. There is nothing admirable about being agreeable at the expense of your truth, and there is no biological or psychological evidence that being nice to everyone makes you happier. In fact, the data shows the opposite. Authenticity, aligned action, and healthy boundaries are what generate long-term well-being and satisfaction. So if you've been taught to be nice to everyone, it's time to unlearn that lesson. You are not obligated to carry the emotional weight of others, you are not responsible for everyone's comfort, and you are not required to be liked in order to be worthy. You are here to be real, and that requires courage. That requires clarity. That requires learning to sit with the discomfort of other people's disappointment, because in doing so, you reclaim your voice, your power, and your peace. That is the work. That is the path. And that is how you stop being nice to everyone, so you can finally start being true to yourself. And once you start down this path, where you choose honesty over harmony, truth over ease, you begin to notice just how much of your life has been shaped by this automatic reflex to please. It's not just the big decisions, but the thousands of micro decisions you've made over time. How often have you said yes to avoid guilt, agreed to plans you didn't want to be part of, or laughed at something that didn't resonate with you just to maintain social cohesion? These behaviors seem small, but repeated over time, they compound into something significant, the erosion of your sense of self. The brain is incredibly adaptive. That's the good news. Through neuroplasticity, your brain rewires itself in response to your actions. But the same mechanism that helps you grow is also what traps you in a cycle of behavior that doesn't serve you. If you've trained your brain to associate safety with agreeableness, then the idea of saying no feels like a threat. But it's not, it's a discomfort, a transient signal, not a warning of danger. And unless you expose yourself to that discomfort regularly, you remain stuck. You remain small. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called exposure therapy. It involves deliberately facing the thing you fear in small, manageable steps to desensitize the brain's threat response. When you stop being nice to everyone, you are essentially doing exposure therapy on your own nervous system. You're confronting the internal panic that arises when you imagine someone disliking you, and you're teaching your brain, over and over, that you will survive, that your worth is not determined by other people's perception of you. That being disliked is not the end of the world, that sometimes it's the beginning of freedom. Now, this work isn't linear, you'll regress. There will be moments where you cave, where you smile when you don't mean it, where you offer help when you're exhausted, where you say yes to something you know you shouldn't. That's not failure, that's feedback. Each moment is a chance to reflect and recalibrate. The nervous system doesn't change through perfection. It changes through persistence. You'll also start to notice how society reinforces the behavior of chronic niceness, especially in certain demographics. In many environments, women are socialized to prioritize harmony and deference. In certain cultures, collectivism is valued over individual expression. In some workplaces, the cost of not being a team player is professional stagnation. These are real forces, but they don't have to dictate your internal compass. Social systems are not excuses for self-betrayal. Understanding them is the first step toward navigating them consciously and strategically. When you start practicing authenticity over niceness, you also have to reckon with your own identity. You have to ask, who am I when I'm not trying to make everyone else comfortable? What do I value outside of validation? What do I want if I'm no longer living to satisfy other people's expectations? These questions can be disorienting, especially if you've spent years, sometimes decades, defining yourself by your usefulness to others. But discomfort is the price of clarity, and clarity is where real transformation begins. One powerful practice is to track the moments you override your own needs, keep a log, not to shame yourself, but to increase your awareness. Did you say yes out of fear? Did you smile to diffuse tension? Did you avoid expressing an opinion that mattered to you? Each entry is data. Each entry helps you see the architecture of your behavioral patterns. Awareness always precedes change. As you build this awareness, you'll begin to reframe your internal language. You'll shift from, I don't want to upset them, to I'm not responsible for their emotional state. You'll move from what if they think I'm selfish, to it's okay to prioritize myself. Language shapes perception, and perception shapes reality. If your self-talk is rooted in fear and guilt, your decisions will be too. But if your internal narrative is grounded in self-respect and clarity, you'll find it easier to hold your line. And remember, Niceness is often used as a form of manipulation, even if we don't see it that way. When we're nice to avoid conflict, we're controlling. We're trying to control how others see us, how they feel about us, how they respond to us. True authenticity relinquishes that control. It allows people to have their reactions, even if they're uncomfortable, even if they disapprove. That's not cold, that's integrity. There's something biologically liberating about this shift. When you stop orienting your decisions around other people's expectations, your nervous system begins to relax. Not right away, of course. At first, it protests. But with repetition, it learns that boundaries are not barriers to connection. They are the foundation of it. You can't truly connect when you're performing. You can't truly be loved when you're hiding. You can't truly feel peace when you're constantly managing perception. What you're really craving isn't approval, it's freedom. And freedom doesn't come from being liked, it comes from being real. There will be pushback. When you stop being excessively nice, people will notice. Some will be confused, some will be disappointed. Some will be angry, not because you're doing something wrong, but because they were benefiting from your lack of boundaries. That's inevitable. It's not your job to cushion their discomfort. It's your job to stay aligned. People who only value you when you're compliant were never valuing you in the first place. They were valuing what you could give them, how you made them feel, how little you asked for. That's a transaction, not a relationship. The sooner you recognize the difference, the better. You may also begin to grieve, not just the relationships that shift or dissolve, but the version of yourself you've outgrown, the nice version, the always, smiling always, agreeing always, available version. That part of you did its job, it kept you safe, it helped you survive, but now it's time to thrive, and thriving requires a different identity, one rooted in self-respect, clarity, and the willingness to be disliked. That's a core concept in psychological development, the willingness to be disliked. It's not easy, but it's necessary. You cannot grow and be universally accepted at the same time. You cannot evolve and stay familiar to everyone. You cannot be free and keep everyone comfortable. These are trade-offs, and you must choose. Physiologically, as you build this capacity, you'll notice shifts. Your baseline stress levels will start to decrease. Your heart rate variability, a marker of nervous system health, will improve. Your sleep will become deeper. Your decision-making will become clearer. Why? Because your brain is no longer operating under the constant strain of social vigilance. You're no longer scanning for micro-rejections. You're no longer managing impressions. That's energy your body and brain can now use for growth, creativity, and connection. You'll also find that your communication becomes more efficient. You won't need to over-explain. You won't feel compelled to justify your boundaries. A simple no will be enough. That's not arrogance. It's alignment, and alignment communicates confidence. People may not always agree with you, but they'll respect you. And if they don't, that's useful information too. There's a difference between being nice and being good. Being good involves ethics, character, and intention. Being nice is often about optics. When you stop focusing on being liked, you can start focusing on being impactful, on being honest, on being real, and that's what people truly remember. Not how comfortable you made them, but how clearly you showed up. You begin to attract different people when you live this way. People who value truth over flattery. People who respect boundaries, people who have done their own internal work, and in those relationships you can finally exhale because you're no longer performing, you're simply being. But you don't get there without the discomfort. You don't get there without choosing your truth over someone else's comfort. You don't get there without retraining your brain, one decision at a time. The path to personal freedom isn't glamorous, it's often lonely. It requires moments of silence after you speak your truth. It requires walking away when your nervous system screams at you to please. But that silence, that space, that solitude, that's where power lives. That's where identity forms, that's where clarity sharpens, so the next time you feel the reflex to be nice, to say yes, to laugh, to agree, to accommodate, pause, breathe, ask yourself, is this true for me? Is this how I want to show up? Is this aligned with who I'm becoming? And if the answer is no, honor it, because every time you do, you're not just changing your behavior, you're changing your brain, you're reshaping your nervous system. You're telling your future self, I've got you, I'm listening, I'm done abandoning you for the comfort of others. That's not selfish, that's sovereignty. That's what it means to be psychologically mature, biologically integrated, and emotionally whole. That's what happens when you stop being nice to everyone and finally start being you. When you stop being nice to everyone, you start being honest with yourself. You no longer shrink to fit into spaces that were never meant for your truth. You begin to respect your own time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. You speak with intention instead of obligation. You choose peace over approval and alignment over acceptance. It doesn't make you harsh, it makes you real. And in that realness, you don't just find strength, you reclaim ownership of your life. Because true freedom isn't about making everyone else comfortable, it's about becoming someone you can finally live with without apology, without regret, and without the constant pressure to be someone you're not.